They say you get used to silence after someone you love dies. That's not true. You don't get used to it, you just get better at pretending it's peaceful. That morning, the VA hospital was quiet in that peculiar way government buildings always are. Not silent. Just restrained. Like everyone inside had agreed to speak softer, move slower, breathe lighter. The kind of quiet where the sound of a cough travels the length of a hallway, and the rustling of a newspaper is practically scandalous. I'd been sitting in the waiting room for nearly 20 minutes, flipping through a dog-eared magazine with outdated recipes for diabetic-friendly casseroles. My name hadn't been called yet, but that was fine. Mondays were always backed up. And besides, I liked being early. It's a habit you don't shake after being married to a Marine. Walter used to say, "Margie, time is a courtesy. You show up on time for yourself. You show up early for others." So I always showed up early. Especially here, at the VA. It was one of the few places that still felt like it remembered people like him, like us. I was halfway through an article about how to freeze green beans properly when I noticed her. She was sitting across the room, maybe 3 chairs down from the blood pressure station. Young, well, younger than me. Early 40s, maybe late 30s. Black. Quiet. Dressed simply in a navy blue sweatshirt and gray slacks. Nothing remarkable about her at first glance, except for the posture. She sat like a statue, upright, composed, not a fidget in her bones. That was the first thing that struck me. The second thing was her eyes. She wasn't reading or looking at her phone like the rest of us. She was watching. Not anxiously, more like she was measuring the room. Taking it in. Like she'd seen rooms like this before, and knew something could go wrong in them. It unsettled me. At first, I thought she might be nervous. VA hospitals can feel that way. But there was something else. Something I couldn't name, even after all my years of watching people in rooms just like this. Something about her said, "I've worn a uniform. I've been through things no one here can see." But she didn't wear one now. Just those plain clothes, and a pair of old sneakers, scuffed near the toes. Then it happened. The door near the staff hallway swung open with a loud clack, and in stepped a man I recognized too well. Officer Dane Kessler. VA Security. Youngish, white, maybe early 30s. Built like a football coach who never quite made varsity. His belt was crowded with all the usual gear, handcuffs, pepper spray, the holster he touched too often. I'd seen him around before. Always pacing more than patrolling, always posturing. Like someone playing dress-up in authority. He walked past the front desk, didn't nod at the receptionist, and didn't speak to anyone. Just scanned the waiting room like he was looking for something, or something. His eyes landed on her. And then he walked straight toward her, fast. Too fast for that kind of place. "You can't sit there," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "These seats are for veterans. Priority seating." She didn't flinch. Didn't look startled or even confused. She just looked up at him and said, "I know." "Well, then I shouldn't have to explain it," he snapped. I shifted forward in my seat. Something wasn't right. Not with his tone. Not with her reaction. Not with the way a couple of the men around us suddenly decided to look very interested in their phones. "I'm waiting for my appointment," she said. Her voice was low, level. "This is where they told me to sit." "Well, they told you wrong." He tapped the back of a nearby chair with his knuckles. "Veterans only. That's policy. You can wait in the general seating area." She raised an eyebrow. "Isn't this the general seating area?" He sneered. You think you're clever? I'm telling you, you need to move. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be. I felt my stomach twist. I'd heard that phrase before, don't make this difficult. Walter used to say it was the line right before someone made it difficult on purpose. The woman reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a wallet. She opened it and held up a card, green, worn, government-issued. Colonel Alana Briggs, she said. Retired. Marine Corps. The room went still. Even I felt my heart skip. A colonel? But Kessler didn't even glance at the card. Didn't ask to see it properly. He waved his hand. Anyone can print a fake ID these days, he said, louder now. I'm not buying it. You need to get out of this seat now, or I'll escort you out. She didn't move. I earned this seat, she said. Same as the men sitting next to me. And that was when he did it. He put his hand on the butt of his holstered weapon. Not fully. Not drawn. But enough. Just enough to say, I could. A chill went through me. I stood up. Not because I planned to, Lord, no. My knees are bad, and I don't stand quickly for anything these days. But my body moved before my brain did. I stood like someone who just heard a wrong note played during a church hymn. Officer, I called, surprised at how loud my voice sounded. That won't be necessary. He turned, eyes narrowing. Ma'am, sit down. This is a security matter. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I've been coming here for over a decade, I said. I know the difference between a patient and a problem. She's no problem. He looked me up and down, like deciding whether it was worth responding to the old lady. Alana spoke again. You don't need to escalate this, she said calmly. There's no threat here. I'm simply waiting to be seen. Kessler's face reddened. You don't tell me what's a threat, he barked. And I'm not asking again. Around the room, phones were coming out. Slowly, quietly. One by one. The shimmer of screens catching the fluorescent light. Recording. Alana's posture hadn't changed. Still upright. Still dignified. But her voice, when she spoke next, had an edge of command to it. I suggest you radio your supervisor. That seemed to tip him over. He took a step closer to her. Too close. I stepped between them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't brave. I just moved. My right shoulder brushed Alana's arm as I did. She didn't move. Neither did I. Officer Kessler's hand froze near his hip. You don't want to do this, I said softly, but clearly. Not in front of all these cameras. And not in front of a colonel. He looked at me like I was a ghost. Then came the voice from behind the desk. Officer Kessler, the receptionist called, her voice thin with nerves, your supervisor's on the line. He hesitated, then spun around and stalked off, muttering something under his breath. The moment stretched like a pulled thread. Alana exhaled, just once, and leaned back in her seat. I stood there a moment longer before sitting down beside her. We didn't speak. But the room wasn't quiet anymore. It was holding its breath. I used to believe you could tell what kind of person someone was by how they handled a full plate in a buffet line. It sounds silly, but it's true. Do they crowd their dish, pile things they don't need? Do they leave a mess behind for the next person? Or do they take just enough and move along with grace? That morning at the VA, I watched a man reach for power like a greedy diner with a tray, grabbing more than he could carry. And I watched a woman refuse to spill a single ounce of dignity. Officer Kessler disappeared behind the front desk, his radio crackling faintly from the hallway as he stormed toward whatever supervisor had pulled rank on him. The room exhaled slowly, like a balloon with a small leak. Nobody spoke, not really. A few murmurs floated around the corners, low and hushed, like people testing whether it was safe to return to normal. But it wasn't. Not yet. I stayed seated beside the woman, Colonel Alana Briggs, I reminded myself. She hadn't spoken since Kessler walked off, hadn't adjusted her posture or looked for gratitude. She just sat still, like a mountain waits for the weather to pass. I wanted to say something. Thank you, maybe. Or I'm sorry. Or even, are you all right? But she didn't look like she wanted words. And I've learned, at 76, when to offer silence instead. The receptionist at the desk, young, nervous, with a name tag that read Linda, kept glancing toward us. Her fingers trembled as she tapped at her keyboard. She'd called the supervisor. That much was clear. But whether it was out of duty or conscience, I didn't know. Do you know what's going to happen now? I asked quietly. Alana turned toward me, just slightly. Depends on who walks through that door next. Her voice was like slate, flat, heavy, unshakable. She wasn't scared. I wasn't even sure she was angry. It was something deeper. A kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep. The kind of tired that comes from knowing this isn't the first time. Or the 10th. I didn't ask her why she hadn't insisted on showing her credentials sooner. I knew the answer already. Sometimes, it's not about proving who you are. It's about watching who they become before they know. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The TV in the corner played a rerun of Wheel of Fortune, but nobody was watching. A man near the window coughed into his sleeve. A woman across the aisle opened a bag of pretzels and didn't eat a single one. Every movement felt forced. Every breath sounded like a footstep in a church after dark. Then the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Kessler. It was a man in a light gray dress shirt, sleeves rolled, ID badge clipped to his belt. He looked like someone who normally lived behind glass doors and spreadsheets, someone whose tie probably hung on a hook beside a framed diploma. Not a soldier. Not a cop. Not a guard. But his eyes were alert. Aware. He walked up to the front desk, spoke briefly to Linda, then turned toward us. Colonel Briggs, he asked. She nodded once. I'm Kevin Mallory. VA Regional Security Supervisor. May I sit? Go ahead, she said. He took the seat on her other side. I reviewed the incident on the live feed. Officer Kessler's body cam is active, and we've got multiple angles from the front lobby. He glanced around at the phones in the room, still being held in too many quiet hands. And clearly, there are other recordings. Alana didn't flinch. You don't need to apologize, she said. I wasn't going to, he replied. But I will say, I'm here to make this right. She turned her full body toward him now, and the change was subtle but seismic. She wasn't just a woman in a sweatshirt anymore. She was a commanding officer inspecting a report. Then start by asking why I was approached, she said. Not how. Mallory blinked. That hesitation told me everything. I understand, he said after a beat. Officer Kessler claimed he didn't recognize you as a veteran and was enforcing a seating protocol. There is no protocol for seating here, Alana said. There are customs. There is respect. But no written policy. He sighed. You're right. There isn't. So again, why was I approached? Silence. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was surgical. Precise. And it cut through more than just the air between them. Mallory's voice dropped. He will be removed from his post pending review. That's already been ordered. That's a start, Alana replied. Then she leaned forward slightly. But don't confuse discipline with resolution, she said. The issue isn't a man. It's a mindset. It was then I saw something shift in his posture, something like regret. Or recognition. I'll file a full report, he said. But I think there's someone else who needs to be informed. This could escalate. I hope it does, she said. Not everything should be quiet. When he left, I finally turned to her fully. You shouldn't have had to explain yourself, I said. Not to anyone. Alana looked at me. But I did. That's the point. I swallowed. I'm sorry. For what? For sitting so long before I stood up. She held my gaze. Then, just for a moment, her expression softened. You stood up when it counted, she said. That's more than most. I looked down at my hands. The veins on them were raised and blue like tiny rivers. I thought of all the years I'd spent sitting quietly. Watching things I didn't fully understand, telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I used to think silence was respectful, I murmured. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. An hour later, a uniformed officer arrived, not VA security, but city police. They came with a clipboard, a neutral face, and an apology that wasn't theirs to give. Officer Kessler was escorted from the building through the rear entrance. No handcuffs. No public scene. Just quiet removal. Administrative language wrapped around personal failure. But the waiting room had changed. People sat differently now. A man who hadn't made eye contact earlier offered Alana his seat, even though she didn't need it. The woman with the pretzels finally ate one. Linda at the front desk kept glancing up, her face pink with something like remorse. And me? I sat beside a stranger and wondered how long I would remember the sound of her name in the air. Colonel Alana Briggs. I said it out loud when she finally stood to leave. She turned. Thank you for your service. She gave me a look, not prideful, not superior. Just human. Thank you for yours, she said. It takes more than one kind of courage. Then she walked away. And I stayed in that chair, surrounded by all the quiet she left behind, realizing that some silences are earned. But others are broken, because they need to be. There's a kind of silence that doesn't settle. It clings. It doesn't fill the room with peace. It hovers like smoke after something's burned, thick, invisible, and undeniable. You feel it before you hear it. You carry it with you even when you leave. That was the kind of silence that wrapped itself around the VA waiting room after Colonel Alana Briggs walked out. Nobody said a word. Not right away. The television continued playing in the corner, but the game show's theme music sounded almost offensive now, like laughter at a funeral. A nurse wheeled by with a clipboard and didn't make eye contact with anyone. The receptionist, Linda, typed with trembling hands, her eyes darting to the hallway as if expecting someone else to burst through. I remained in my seat. I had nowhere urgent to be, not really. My appointment wasn't for another 30 minutes, and truth be told, I didn't feel like standing just yet. Not after what had just happened. Not with the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a memory I hadn't asked for. It felt strange, sitting in the same chair as before, surrounded by the same people, and yet feeling like everything around us had been rearranged. Like someone had shuffled the furniture of reality and forgotten to tell us. I noticed the man across from me first. He was maybe in his late 60s, wearing a bald cap that read Vietnam veteran, U.S. Army. He'd stayed stone still during the entire incident, his eyes focused somewhere just above the floor tiles. Now, he shifted. Cleared his throat. Looked at me. "She was a Marine," he said softly. I nodded. "She outranked half the folks in this building," he added. I nodded again. "More than half, I'd wager." He shook his head and stared down at his boots. Didn't even ask her name. I wasn't sure if he was talking about Officer Kessler, or himself. Time passed the way it does in waiting rooms. Slowly, irregularly, with no respect for clocks or schedules. The names being called over the intercom sounded like intrusions now, shards of bureaucracy interrupting the quiet process of reflection. "Mr. Dunham, room 4A. Mrs. Greaves, labs." Every voice that answered did so a little more softly than usual. As if no one wanted to break the spell. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the images replay. The way Alana had held her ground, not with defiance, but with grace. The way Kessler had tried to make himself larger by diminishing her. And the way the room, myself included, had held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. I opened my eyes and found that others were still looking around, too. Searching each other's faces as though trying to solve a puzzle none of us wanted to admit we were a part of. A young woman in scrubs passed by with a clipboard. She paused near my chair, gave me a hesitant smile, and whispered, "That was brave, ma'am." I blinked. "Pardon?" "Speaking up like that," she said. "Not many do." I swallowed. "Not many should have to." She nodded, a blush rising in her cheeks, and moved along. That morning had started normally. Coffee. Light rain. My favorite cardigan with the one stubborn button I still haven't replaced. I'd fed the cat, read the paper, circled the coupon for denture adhesive, and driven to the VA like I had 100 times before. And then something happened. Not a riot. Not a crime. Just, something. A moment. One woman was being told she didn't belong. One man mistook a badge for permission. And the rest of us, mostly older, mostly quiet, watching the storm blow in, unsure whether to close our eyes or our mouths. But it wasn't just that moment that haunted me. It was what it represented. Because the truth is, that wasn't the first time I'd seen something like it. When I was 16, in 1963, my best friend Sarah invited me to sit with her and her cousin Martha at a diner in Alabama. Martha was black. I remember the tension the moment we entered, the waitress narrowing her eyes, the sound of clinking silverware faltering around us. And when we sat down, I remember Sarah taking my hand under the table. Martha said nothing, just placed her napkin in her lap. 10 minutes later, the manager approached and told us we needed to leave. "Wrong company," he said, looking straight at Martha. We left. Quietly. Embarrassed. Humiliated. Later that night, Sarah cried on the front porch. I held her hand. But I didn't say anything brave. I didn't write a letter. I didn't stand up. I was young. I was scared. I told myself it wasn't my battle. But deep down, I knew I'd chosen safety over justice. That memory surfaced like a bruise that morning, fresh, uninvited, throbbing beneath the skin. And I thought, maybe this is my second chance. An older man with a cane hobbled over from the far side of the waiting room and eased into the chair Alana had occupied earlier. He sat there for a moment, rubbing his knees, then looked around as if sensing the remnants of what had just occurred. After a pause, he said, to no one in particular, "Was that the colonel?" Several heads nodded. "She still comes around here?" he asked. I turned. "You know her?" He chuckled. I served under her, back in '09. Afghanistan. She saved our unit's skin more times than I can count. Kept us alive. Led from the front. He sighed. Hell of a woman. I leaned forward. Then why didn't you say something when that officer? He looked at me with tired eyes. Because I was ashamed, he said. Ashamed it still happens. And ashamed that I froze. His words weren't loud. But they traveled. And that, somehow, made them heavier than a shout. I took out my little notepad from my purse, the one I keep for crossword clues and grocery lists. But this time, I flipped to a blank page and just wrote a name. Alana Briggs. Then, underneath it. Colonel. Marine. Woman. Invisible. Not anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do with those words, but I knew I couldn't forget them. Couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. Couldn't go home and let the television drown it out with daytime noise. We all carry the weight of the stories we witness. Some of us carry it in silence. Some of us carry it in notebooks. Some of us carry it for a lifetime. My name was called eventually. Room 2B. The nurse who greeted me was gentle. She had kind eyes and made small talk about the weather, but I could tell she knew what had happened in the waiting room. Her voice had that softness people wear when they've seen someone cry and don't want to mention it, but also don't want to act like nothing's wrong. As she took my blood pressure, she said, "People notice, you know." I glanced at her. "When someone does the right thing," she added. "Even if it's hard." I didn't say anything. Just nodded. Let her cuff my arm and check the monitor. Numbers on a screen. Heartbeat. Pressure. Data. But she didn't know that the loudest thing in me wasn't my pulse. It was that quiet voice from earlier. I earned this seat. God, how many times had I sat without earning it? How many moments had I witnessed from the comfort of, not my problem? How many times had women like Alana had to carry the burden of proving they belonged in spaces they'd already paid for with service, sweat, and silence? When I left the examination room, I passed by the same seat she'd occupied. It was empty now. But I paused. And I sat in it. Not because I had to. But because I could. And because someone had reminded me why that mattered. The chair where Alana Briggs had been sitting stayed empty for the next 20 minutes. No one dared touch it. Not the man with the clipboard who came in looking for a spot. Not the nurse who wheeled in a patient from radiology. Not even the janitor, who swept around its legs like it belonged to someone holy. It was just a chair. Worn. Plastic. Brown. The kind with steel legs that creak when you lean back too far. But after what happened, it became something else. A place where someone took a stand without standing up. A chair that belonged to a woman who refused to be erased. And somehow, we all felt it. I was still sitting nearby, though I'd finished my appointment and could have left. Something anchored me there. A feeling I couldn't explain. I wasn't waiting for a ride or a friend. I was waiting for clarity, something that hadn't yet arrived. The room had grown quieter again, but not like before. This silence was alert. Electric. As though everyone inside it was replaying the incident in their heads and wondering what it meant that none of them had spoken. Or that only one of them did. Nobody said it aloud, but I could see it in their eyes. Guilt is a patient guest. It never rushes to leave. The TV now played a war documentary rerun on PBS. Soldiers in black and white crawled across European fields, their helmets too large, their eyes too young. It was oddly appropriate. The sound was low, the images flickering across a screen no one was truly watching. Then, the main entrance doors slid open again, and there she was. Colonel Alana Briggs. She walked in like she'd never left. Same posture. Same pace. Same deliberate calm. Her sweatshirt still bore a faint crease where she'd been seated earlier. The VA badge, now clipped visibly to the front of her shirt, caught the light as she moved. Heads turned. Subtly. Slowly. As if drawn to her by instinct. She carried nothing but a small folder under one arm. No entourage. No fanfare. Just presence. She stopped at the reception desk. Linda looked up, startled. "I have a scheduled consult," Alana said evenly. "With Dr. Sharif. 11:30. "Yes, ma'am," Linda stammered, typing quickly. "You're all set. Room 5B. Thank you." Then she turned. And this time, instead of walking directly down the hallway, she looked at us. All of us. One by one. Like a commander surveying her unit before a mission. And for a split second, just one, you could feel the air shift. Nobody moved. But her. She stepped across the waiting room with a quiet gravity that demanded respect without asking for it. Each step felt like punctuation. Each glance is like a test. She paused at the empty chair. Then she sat. The same chair. The same posture. And suddenly, the room had a second chance. It was the young man in scrubs who moved first. He stood up from his seat against the wall and crossed the floor, stopping in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to apologize. I should have said something earlier." Alana looked up at him. Her expression is unreadable. He swallowed. "You shouldn't have had to go through that." She nodded once. "Thank you." He returned to his seat, cheeks flushed, but straighter than before. Then the woman with the pretzels from earlier, the one who hadn't eaten them during the whole incident, reached into her purse, pulled out a small thermos, and offered it toward Alana. "I brought tea," she said. "Chamomile. If you'd like." Alana smiled softly. "I'm good, thank you." And then it happened. A subtle domino of humanity. People began to shift in their seats. Not away from her, but closer. Angles changed. Bodies turned. The line between bystander and ally began to blur. One woman leaned forward, elbows on knees. A man near the water cooler placed his phone face down and looked up. Even Linda, behind the desk, rose from her chair and walked out front. She didn't say anything. Just stood by the door with her hands clasped in front of her, head slightly bowed. Not shame. Not guilt. Witness. I watched it all from the second row, hands folded in my lap like I was in church. I didn't cry, though something in me wanted to. Instead, I let the moment settle. It was sacred in a way few moments are, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Alana hadn't returned for praise. She didn't come back to make a scene or prove a point. She came back because she belonged there. And deep down, we all knew it. I looked around the room and thought of all the other spaces she, and women like her, had been asked to leave. Offices. Committees. Meetings. Church pews. Command tents. And now, apparently, a waiting room. I thought of how many chairs had tried to deny her. And how many more she had to reclaim. But this one, this humble, brown VA chair, that tried to reject her, now belonged to her. Not because she demanded it. Because she defended it. A tall man in his late 70s, wearing a faded navy windbreaker, approached next. He didn't speak. Just saluted. Alana returned the gesture without a word. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever seen between two people. No rank. No theater. Just recognition. A few minutes passed before the intercom buzzed. "Colonel Briggs, room 5B. She stood slowly. The folder was still tucked under one arm. But before walking away, she turned to the room. "Thank you," she said simply. And then she walked. Not just to an exam room. But through the moment. Through history. Through all the closed doors and small humiliations she'd weathered. And we watched her go, not as strangers. As witnesses. I don't remember who spoke first after she left. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the army vet near the wall. But someone said she shouldn't have had to come back to prove anything. And someone else answered, "No, but I'm glad she did." Because sometimes, it's not about proving who you are. It's about reminding others who they can be. Before I left, I walked past Linda's desk. She looked up, still a little pale. "I feel like I failed her," she whispered. I shook my head. "You called for help. That mattered. I should have said something sooner." I thought about that. Then I said, "She came back. That says more about her than it ever will about any of us." She nodded, blinking fast. And then, I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Now we just make sure it doesn't happen again." That night, I wrote in my journal. I don't always write every day. Some days, my hands ache too much. Some days, the words don't come. But that night, the words poured. Today, I saw what quiet courage looks like. Not in battle. Not in politics. But in a waiting room. It wore sneakers and a sweatshirt. It had no trumpet. No flag. But it changed everything. I didn't know what the next day would bring. But I knew I would remember that Monday morning as long as my memory served me. Because nobody moved. But her. And because she moved. The rest of us finally did, too. You can tell a lot about a man by how he walks into a room that's gone quiet. Some come in with noise, trying to break the silence before it settles on their shoulders. Others come in with swagger, mistaking silence for weakness. But the ones who matter, the ones who carry responsibility like it's part of their spine, walk in with intention. He walked in like that. The man in the trench coat. He didn't wear a badge. Didn't bark orders. Just stepped through the sliding glass doors of the VA hospital with an unmistakable presence. The kind of presence that made the air shift. That made nurses straighten their backs. That made even the ones who hadn't witnessed what happened sit up a little straighter, sensing something important had arrived. Andrew Preston. The mayor of our city. I'd met him once at a Gold Star event years ago. Walter had been gone nearly a decade by then, but I'd still received a medal in his name. Preston had shaken my hand with both of his, looked me in the eye, and said, "We remember." I didn't know if he did, but the way he'd said it mattered. That was a younger version of him. Today, he looked older. Not tired, seasoned. He wore a dark gray trench coat that swept just above his ankles, a navy scarf tucked neatly beneath it, and carried no briefcase, no entourage. Just a leather notepad in one hand, the kind a man carries when he's come to listen more than speak. He walked past the front desk without waiting for anyone to announce him. He knew where he was going. He was going to find Alana. By now, word had spread. Even the walls felt like they knew. Linda, the receptionist, had risen again from her desk and stood with her hands folded, watching him approach. He stopped just shy of the chairs. "Colonel Briggs?" he asked, his voice steady but not loud. She looked up from where she sat, still in the same chair, still calm, still composed. "I am." He nodded once. "I'm Mayor Andrew Preston. I'm here because I received a direct call from you. And because what happened here is unacceptable." Alana didn't respond with surprise. She simply nodded in acknowledgement, like she expected nothing less than a man of power doing what power is supposed to do, show up. He turned to the room, to all of us still sitting in silence. "I want to be very clear," he said. "What occurred in this waiting room today is not just a policy failure. It is a failure of values. And it will be addressed." He wasn't reading from a statement. He wasn't hedging. And that's when I realized something strange was happening. The waiting room, this bland, beige, often forgotten room where time went to die, was becoming a courtroom. And we were the jury. Preston looked toward Linda. "Is the security officer who initiated this confrontation still on the premises?" She shook her head. "He was escorted out earlier by city officers. Regional security ordered it." He nodded. "Good." Then he turned back to Alana. "May I sit?" She gestured to the chair beside her. The same one Kessler had refused to approach with respect. He took it without hesitation. And then something rare happened. A man in authority asked a woman to tell her story. And then he listened. Alana spoke without flourish. No dramatics. Just facts. She described how she had arrived early for her appointment. She'd taken a seat in the general waiting area. How she'd shown her ID without being asked, and had been dismissed. How the confrontation escalated was not because she had raised her voice, but because someone else couldn't recognize dignity when it didn't come dressed in uniform. Preston took notes. The scratch of his pen was the only sound in the room. I looked around. Not a single person was on their phone. Not one. Even though the TV had been turned off, the screen now reflected only the overhead lights. Alana finished speaking. And the mayor closed his notepad. Then he looked around the room again. His eyes didn't dart. They rested, slowly, on each of us. "This city," he said, "owes a debt to people who serve, not just in uniform, but in conduct. What Colonel Briggs did today was not for herself. She held a mirror to all of us. And we have to ask, what did we see?" No one answered. We didn't have to. Because we all saw it. And then a moment I'll never forget. Preston stood up, turned to the city police officer who had been standing quietly behind him, and said, "I want a formal statement recorded today. All security footage preserved. All body cam footage requested. Every witness who is willing to speak must be heard." Then, his voice still firm, he added, "And let it be known, this officer will not wear a city badge again." There was no applause. Just gravity. Respect doesn't always come with clapping. Sometimes it comes with stillness. After a long pause, one woman from the far corner, elderly, small-voiced, lifted her hand. "I recorded part of it," she said. "On my phone. Would it help?" Preston nodded. "Yes. Thank you." She stood slowly and crossed the room, handing her phone to the officer beside him. "I didn't know what else to do," she added. Alana looked up. "You did enough." And just like that, a floodgate opened. Another man stood. "I was sitting near the desk. I heard everything." "I was right by the water cooler," said another. "I saw when he touched his weapon," said someone else. In minutes, what had begun as isolation turned into documentation. What had begun as silence turned into testimony. We were no longer a waiting room full of strangers. We were witnesses. And I realized, this is what justice looks like in real time. Not grand speeches. Not cable news. Just people deciding that the truth matters, and that they matter enough to speak it. Eventually, Preston turned back to Alana. "Colonel Briggs," he said, "on behalf of this city, I want to apologize. But more than that, I want to promise you that what happened here will not be buried." She nodded once. "Thank you," she replied. Then she stood. And in a gesture that felt almost biblical, the mayor extended his hand, not to shake hers, but to hold the chair. To acknowledge that the seat she had claimed was never his to give, but his duty to protect. When they left the room, the air didn't return to normal. Because there was no normal to return to. Only something new. Something better. I sat for a while after they left. I thought about Walter. About how he used to say that courage isn't always about running into fire, it's about refusing to back away from smoke. I thought about my moments of silence, those I'd regretted, those I'd justified. And then I thought about how today, I didn't stay silent. And how it mattered. Before I stood to leave, Linda called out softly. "Mrs. Whitmore." I turned. "There's a town hall next week," she said. "The mayor's office is asking for witnesses to speak on camera, if possible. Would you consider?" I didn't let her finish. "Yes," I said. "The thing about truth is, it doesn't knock. It bursts in. It spills into living rooms and dinner tables and office break rooms, wearing headlines like shoes still wet from the storm. And once it's inside, it demands to be seen. Even by people who don't want to look. That's what happened 2 days after the incident at the VA. I was in my kitchen, buttering toast and waiting for my coffee to finish brewing, when I heard it. Local hero shamed at VA hospital, mayor intervenes after retired Marine is harassed in waiting room. It was the TV. Channel 4, mid-morning news. I turned up the volume with a shaky hand. There she was, Alana Briggs, on the screen. The same navy blue sweatshirt. The same quiet fire behind her eyes. A still frame from someone's phone footage showed her seated, calm, while a man stood over her, clearly agitated. The caption read, "Security officer placed under investigation." They blurred his face. I wish they hadn't. The segment only lasted 3 minutes. But it felt like a lifetime. I watched, frozen, as the anchor described what happened, a black woman, a retired Marine colonel, waiting peacefully for her appointment at a veterans hospital. A white male security officer questioned her right to sit. Escalation. Intimidation. The mayor's intervention. And now, calls for accountability. They didn't mention the bystanders. They didn't mention me. And that, somehow, felt right. Because this wasn't my story. It was hers. We were just lucky enough to witness it, and, maybe, finally, to get it right. Later that day, the phone rang. It was my granddaughter, Leah. She's 28, works in social work in Portland, and usually calls only on weekends or holidays. But her voice came breathless, urgent. "Grandma, is that your VA hospital on the news?" I told her yes, it was. "And were you? Were you there? The article said it happened Monday morning. Weren't you getting your blood pressure checked?" I paused. Then I said, yes. I was there. A beat of silence. "Grandma," her voice cracked, like she didn't know how to feel. "I didn't do anything big," I said quickly. "I didn't save the day. But I saw it. I said something. I stood when others didn't. She was quiet again. Then, I'm proud of you. Those 4 words hit harder than I expected. I'd lived through wars, recessions, the deaths of people I loved, and the quiet erosion of being noticed less as you grow older. But somehow, hearing my granddaughter say she was proud, in a time when the world seemed to be spinning faster than people could hold on to, it brought something back. Like breath after drowning. By evening, the story had spread farther. My neighbor Ruth brought over a casserole, just in case you were too upset to cook. The mailman mentioned it when he dropped off a package. Terrible what happened to that lady. Brave, though. Even my church bulletin sent out an email blast. Let us reflect on the bravery of those who speak truth to power. It was surreal. Not because I was in the center of it, but because I wasn't. The story had become a wave, and Alana was the current. On Thursday morning, I went to the grocery store. I wore a scarf and glasses, not because I expected anyone to recognize me, most of the videos never showed me, but because I felt exposed. Like a layer of me had been pulled outward for others to inspect. At the checkout line, a woman behind me was reading from her phone. Listen to this, she said to her husband. This woman, this colonel, got told to move out of a veteran seat, and the guy didn't even believe her ID. Can you believe that? Her husband grunted. World's upside down. The woman kept reading aloud, not realizing I was listening. She didn't yell. Didn't threaten. Just held her ground. And when the mayor came, she told him straight, discipline is not resolution. The issue isn't a man, it's a mindset. I nearly dropped my wallet. Because those were Alana's words. I remembered hearing them. Right there, in that room. And now, they were being repeated in a supermarket checkout line like scripture. It stunned me. Because I realized, in that moment, truth travels not just fast, but deep. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter to the local paper. Not an editorial. Not a manifesto. Just a letter. To the editor. This week, I witnessed something at our local VA hospital that changed me. A woman was challenged for no other reason than the color of her skin and the quiet of her presence. She did not respond with rage. She responded with the truth. And for once, people listened. I am 76 years old. I have lived through decades of don't get involved and stay in your lane. I've been silent when I should have spoken. I've turned away when I should have stood. But on Monday, I stood. Not because I'm brave, but because I saw someone braver. Colonel Alana Briggs didn't just reclaim a seat in a waiting room. She reclaimed the dignity we should never have denied her. If we are to be the community we say we are, let that be our lesson. It is never too late to do the right thing. Sincerely. Margaret Whitmore. I didn't know if they'd publish it. But writing it felt like an act of closure. Or maybe an opening. On Saturday morning, the letter ran on page 4. By Sunday, I had 10 voicemails from strangers. Most just said thank you. One man cried. Another said, I was at a different VA when something similar happened years ago. I stayed quiet. I regret it every day. And one message, from a woman named Helen, simply said, you stood for her. Thank you for showing us how. The next week, I received a formal invitation. A town hall, hosted by the mayor's office, on bias in public service. The subject? Power, prejudice, and the cost of silence. I was listed as a community speaker. Not a keynote. Not a panelist. Just someone with something to say. And that felt right. Because maybe the world doesn't need more heroes. Maybe it just needs more people who are willing to tell the truth when it's hardest. I haven't seen Alana Briggs since that morning. But I think of her every day. I think of the way she sat, not proudly, but firmly. I think of the way she said, "I earned this seat." And I think of how that one sentence has reshaped the way I see every room I enter. Sometimes, justice isn't a courtroom. Sometimes, it's a VA waiting room at 10:15 on a Monday morning. Sometimes, it's not a ruling, it's a realization. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do. It looks like someone is being erased, and sees them. There are letters you write to be mailed. And then there are the other kind, the ones you write to no one, for no reason but that something in you needs it said. This one was the second kind. I didn't set out to write it. It wasn't planned. It just happened. One Wednesday morning, I pulled out a stack of old stationery from the back of the sideboard. Yellowed, soft-edged paper with faint blue lines, left over from the days when Walter used to write thank you notes after every promotion, every retirement party, every loss. I sat at the kitchen table with my third cup of coffee and stared out the window. The sky was overcast. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone was mowing wet grass too early in the morning. And I began to write. Dear Margaret, age 16. Yes, I wrote it to myself. The girl I used to be. The one I stopped talking to a long time ago. You don't know this yet, but you will carry silence like it's your inheritance. You will stand in rooms where people speak wrong, act wrong, and you will say nothing. Not because you agree, but because you don't know how to disagree. Because fear is a lesson, too, and it sticks. You will tell yourself that being quiet is safer. More polite. More grown up. Speaking up might make it worse. You will watch people be pushed, passed over, and diminished. And you'll call it, not your place. The pen trembled in my hand, but I didn't stop. There will be a diner in Alabama, 1963. You will sit across from your best friend's cousin. She will be black. You will be proud to be there, until the manager asks her to leave. You will walk out with them, but you won't say a word. Not to the manager. Not in the car ride home. Not to your mother when she asks why you look pale. You'll bury that moment under years of explanations. I was young. I was scared. I didn't know what to say. But you'll know. And it will return. In dreams. In news stories. In hospital waiting rooms. I paused then. My knuckles ached. I rubbed the joints and thought of Alana. Of her steady voice. Her refusal to flinch. She hadn't needed anyone to fight for her. But she had deserved it. And for once, finally, someone had. Maybe that was me. Maybe not. But I had tried. And that counted for something. I kept writing. Decades later, you will find yourself in a room where another woman is asked to leave. Not from a diner, but from a chair. From a space she had already earned. And you will see the same look in the man's eyes. The same disbelief that a woman like her, quiet, composed, unbothered, could belong. You will recognize it not because you've studied racism in books. But because, deep down, you remember standing next to it, pretending not to see. But this time, you won't look away. You'll stand up. And speak. And when you do, something will shift. Not because the room erupts. Not because you change the world. But because you change yourself. You stop being the girl who swallowed every protest. You stop being the woman who convinced herself that silence was safer than truth. You become someone new. I stopped writing after that. There wasn't more to say. The letter sat on the table for a while, the ink drying into the paper like a wound sealing shut. I didn't mail it. There was no address. I tucked it into a book on the shelf, between A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and an old copy of The Feminine Mystique. Fitting neighbors. Some truths don't belong in the mail. They belong in the margins of the life you've lived, quiet, but real. Later that afternoon, Leah called again. She'd watched the town hall online. Preston had spoken. So had a few community members. Even Linda from the front desk had offered her statement. But no video had been as powerful, she said, as Alana's final remarks. She said something I can't stop thinking about, Leah told me. She said, we don't need every voice to be loud. We need every silence to have meaning. I felt my throat tighten. I wrote something this morning, I told her. A letter. To whom? To me. Leah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, can I hear it? I hadn't planned to share it. But something in her voice, open, earnest, made me reach for the pages. I read it aloud. Slowly. When I finished, there was no response. Just the sound of her breath. Then, I needed that, Grandma. Her voice was fragile. Why? I asked. Because I've been quiet too, she said. When it comes to clients. To friends. I've let things slide that shouldn't. And I always told myself I didn't want to make it worse. I swallowed. That's what I told myself, too, I said. She exhaled. But maybe silence does make it worse. Not always, I said. But sometimes, yes. That evening, I sat outside on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and thought about how many letters go unwritten. How many apologies live only in the mind. How many conversations never get to happen because we're too late, or too afraid, or too proud. And how few moments were given to change that. I didn't feel absolved. But I did feel seen by myself, if nothing else. And that, at this age, is a kind of redemption. A week later, Leah sent me something in the mail. A framed quote, typed on textured paper. It is never too late to do the right thing. Margaret Whitmore. I laughed when I opened it. But then I cried. Because I knew she wasn't just honoring me. She was promising herself. It was the first time I had worn lipstick in over a year. Just a soft rose shade, nothing flashy. But I remembered Walter always said it made me look ready for battle. Which was funny, coming from a Marine. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw the lines around my eyes, the soft tremble at the corners of my mouth, the steady hands holding the compact. Then I smiled. Yes. I was ready. The auditorium wasn't large. It was one of those community spaces attached to City Hall, beige walls, polished wooden floor, and stackable chairs lined up with military precision. The kind of room where local school recitals happen, where retirement ceremonies are hosted, and sometimes, like today, where history tries to explain itself. The sign outside read, Town Forum, Justice, Dignity, and the Cost of Quiet. Featuring Colonel Alana Briggs, Ret. I arrived 20 minutes early, out of habit. The place was half full already. Veterans, nurses, and students with notepads. Grandmothers. Teenagers. A woman holding a baby in the back. There were people I recognized from the VA, some from the waiting room that morning. Others I had never seen, but who carried the same look of curiosity, guilt, and reverence. I found a seat near the front. Not in the very front row, I've never liked feeling watched, but close enough to see her face. I still didn't know what Alana was going to say. But I knew what it would mean. At exactly 6 p.m., she stepped onto the stage. She wasn't in uniform. That struck me first. She wore a dark blue blouse, crisp slacks, and a silver pin shaped like an eagle on her lapel. Her posture was still impeccable, straight spine, level gaze, shoulders squared, but there was something even more commanding in her simplicity. The room fell silent. She walked to the podium slowly, with intention, not theatrics. Then she looked at all of us. And she smiled. Not a showman's grin. A soldier's calm. "Good evening," she began. Her voice was gentle. Firmer than I remembered. Fuller, somehow. Like she'd found new breath. "I'm not here to talk about what happened at the VA," she said. "Because many of you already know. Some of you were there. And the truth is, what happened that morning wasn't new." A pause. It wasn't even surprising. She let the silence hang there, daring us to sit with it. What was new, was what came next. She glanced at me. Briefly. Purposefully. The voices that rose. The quiet that broke. The people who finally decided not to look away. She leaned forward slightly. "You see, injustice doesn't begin with violence. It begins with indifference." I felt the air shift. It wasn't just me. People around me leaned in, like leaning toward warmth. "I've served this country in war zones," Alana continued. "I've worn a uniform, commanded troops, and buried friends. But the hardest battles are not the ones fought with rifles. They're the ones who fought with silence." A murmur in the back. Someone sniffled. "I've sat in boardrooms, briefings, and barracks. And in every room, there's been a moment when someone looked at me and thought, 'You don't belong here.'" She paused again. Longer this time. And they were wrong. I could feel the tear before it fell. It traced the curve of my cheek like a memory trying to find its way out. "I didn't stand up that morning to make a scene," she said. "I stayed seated to make a statement." The audience held its breath. I stayed seated, because I'd earned that seat. Behind me, someone whispered, "Yes, ma'am." She continued. "And what I want you to know, what I hope you carry home tonight, is that dignity isn't given. It's carried. Quietly. Daily. Like armor beneath your clothes." She rested her palms on the edge of the podium. "I don't need parades. I don't need apologies. What I need is a community that recognizes quiet courage when it walks into the room." She nodded slowly. "A community that chooses to see the woman who sits still." For the first time since she began, her voice softened. "There was a woman in the waiting room that day," she said. "Older than me. Wiser, perhaps. She stood up when others didn't. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She just refused to sit still in the face of something wrong. Her eyes found mine. She reminded me that no matter how much you've given to the world still needs your voice. Especially when you think it's too late." I was crying now. And I wasn't alone. The audience rose to their feet when she stepped down from the podium. Not in applause, but in respect. It wasn't noisy. It was reverent. Like a flag being folded. Like a prayer at dusk. Alana nodded politely. Not as a hero, but as someone who had earned the right to be heard. And then she walked off stage. No fanfare. Just legacy. I stayed in my seat long after the chairs began to empty. People passed by, their faces glowing with something I couldn't name but understood. A young man placed his hand on my shoulder. Thank you for being part of that, he said. I didn't correct him. Because maybe I was part of it. Maybe all of us who saw, and stood, and remembered, maybe we're part of something now. Something real. That night, I sat on the porch with Leah. She had flown in just for the forum. She didn't say much during the ride home. But now, under the soft yellow porch light, she turned to me with eyes wide as summer moons. You're different, she said. I smiled. How? You used to hesitate before speaking. Now you breathe like you believe you belong. That did it. I laughed. Then I cried. Then I held her hand and said, maybe it just took me 76 years to stop waiting for permission. The next morning, I walked by the VA hospital. Not for an appointment, just for a walk. The bench near the entrance had a small plaque I'd never noticed before. In honor of those who served in silence. I stopped there. Sat down. And for a moment, I thought of every woman like Alana. And every woman like me. And all the times we had watched from the sidelines, too polite, too unsure, too afraid. But no more. Not after this. Because now, we'd seen what one woman could do. One woman sat still. And reminded the world how to stand. Life doesn't always give us second chances, but courage does. This story reminds us that it's never too late to stand up for what's right. Whether you've served in uniform or simply lived long enough to know the weight of silence, your voice matters, especially when used to protect the dignity of others. Margaret's journey teaches us that even quiet actions can create powerful ripples. One small moment, a woman choosing not to look away, became the spark that challenged injustice, restored honor, and inspired a community to open its eyes. As we grow older, we sometimes question if the world still needs us. The truth? It does, desperately. It needs our wisdom. Our memories. Our willingness to say, that's not right, when others stay silent. We carry decades of lessons, what we stood for, and what we regret not standing for. Now is the time to share them. If this story moved you, touched a memory, or reminded you of your quiet strength, please like, comment, and share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor courage, character, and the power of everyday heroes, especially the ones who've earned their place and choose to use it. Because justice doesn't only belong to the young. Sometimes, it starts in the hands of those who've lived long enough to remember what truly matters.